The Kethmori Empire had been the nightmare of the galaxy for 3,000 years. Imagine creatures that looked like giant insects crossed with dragons, their bodies covered in thick red armor that could stop laser beams. These weren't just scary monsters, though. They were smart, organized, and absolutely ruthless. Their ships weren't built from metal or plastic like ours. Instead, they grew them like plants, except these living ships fed on entire planets full of people. Think about the most terrifying predator you know. A shark, a tiger, or a crocodile. Now imagine something 1,000,000 times worse. The Kethmori could get inside your head without even touching you. They would send waves of pure terror straight into your mind, making you so afraid that you couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even scream. While you stood there frozen in fear, their weapons would melt you alive with acid that could eat through anything. For 3,000 years, no one had ever fought back successfully. Entire civilizations would surrender the moment Kethmori ships appeared in their skies. Some planets would destroy themselves rather than face what was coming. Others would simply wait, hoping for a quick death. Commander Vextar was the most feared hunter in this empire of nightmares. His body told the story of his victories. Every scar on his red shell came from a different world he had conquered. He had hunted thinking machines that could calculate 1,000,000 possibilities in seconds. He had stalked energy beings that could move at the speed of light. He had cornered psychic creatures that could read minds and see the future. All of them had fallen to his claws. Vextar's hunting pack was legendary among the Kethmori. While other commanders needed entire fleets to conquer a world, Vextar could break a civilization with just a dozen ships. He knew exactly how to use fear as a weapon. First, he would destroy a few cities to show his power. Then he would wait, letting the terror spread like a disease. Finally, when the population was completely broken, he would harvest them like crops. So when his scouts brought news of a new star system, Vextar was already planning his next victory. The system had one particularly interesting world, the third planet from a medium-sized yellow star. Long-range scans showed cities, technology, and billions of inhabitants. It looked like it would provide excellent hunting. But as more detailed reports came in, Vextar began to feel something he rarely experienced in disappointment. These creatures called themselves humans, and they seemed almost pathetically weak. They had thin skin that could be cut with simple blades. They had no natural armor, no claws, no fangs. Their bones could break from small falls. They couldn't even survive in their own world's oceans or cold regions without artificial protection. Worse yet, the humans showed no signs of psychic abilities. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy had at least some mental defenses, even primitive. Creatures usually had instincts that helped them resist telepathic attacks, but these humans seemed completely open to mental invasion. It would be like hunting babies. The human military technology was laughably primitive too. They still used chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Their fastest ships couldn't even reach other stars in a reasonable time. Their weapons couldn't penetrate basic Kethmori bioarmor. It would hardly be sporting. Vextar's fellow commanders started making jokes about the upcoming hunt. Some suggested they should send only a single scout ship to conquer the entire planet. Others wondered if the humans were even worth harvesting. They seemed too weak to provide good entertainment or useful energy. But Vextar was a perfectionist. Even hunting weak prey required proper planning. He studied the reports carefully, noting the locations of major population centers and military installations. The humans had divided themselves into separate groups called nations that actually fought against each other. This would make conquest even easier. They couldn't even unite against a common threat. The planet called Earth had large oceans, diverse climates, and billions of inhabitants spread across several continents. The humans had built impressive cities and had developed basic space travel. They had split the atom and created global communication networks. For such a young species, they had achieved quite a lot. It would almost be a shame to destroy such an interesting civilization. Almost Vextar gave his orders. The hunting fleet would be moderate in size, enough ships to ensure complete victory, but not so many as to make the hunt boring. They would begin with the standard fear projection to paralyze the population, then demonstrate their power with a few strategic strikes. After that, the real hunting could begin. As his bioships prepared for the journey to Earth, Vextar felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. Soon he would add another species to his long list of victories. These soft, weak humans would learn what it meant to face the galaxy's ultimate predators. He had no idea that he was about to meet something the Kethmori had never encountered before, prey that refused to stay prey. The day the aliens came, Earth's sky turned into a living nightmare. Massive ships that looked like they were made of flesh and bone descended through the clouds. These weren't the sleek metal spacecraft from movies. They were organic, pulsing things that seemed to breathe and bleed. Their surfaces rippled with strange lights that hurt to look at directly. Some ships were as big as cities, others small and fast like deadly insects. They moved in perfect formation, blocking out the sun over major population centers around the world. Commander Vextar watched from his flagship with satisfaction. This was how it always began. First, the dramatic arrival to show overwhelming force. Then the fear projection would start, and within hours, maybe days at most, the planet's leaders would be begging for mercy. He had done this same routine on hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. The Kethmori began their psychological attack exactly on schedule. Waves of pure terror rolled out from their ships like invisible tsunamis. This wasn't just being scared. This was fear so intense it could stop your heart. Imagine every nightmare you've ever had, hitting you at once, multiplied by 1,000. The telepathic assault was designed to reach into the deepest parts of the mind where basic survival instincts lived and turn them against their owners. Every other world, this moment marked the end of organized resistance. Armies would drop their weapons and run. Governments would collapse as leaders fled to hiding spots. Parents would abandon their children. The strong would trample the weak in desperate attempts to escape the mental torture. But something impossible happened on Earth. Lieutenant Dae-Hyun Park was standing on top of Seoul's military command center when the fear wave hit him. He felt it slam into his mind like a physical blow. Terror so complete, it should have sent him running screaming into the streets. For a split second, his body started to shake and his vision blurred. The alien fear tried to convince him that death was coming, that resistance was hopeless, that he should curl up and wait for the end. Instead, something deep inside Dae-Hyun's mind said, no. Not just no, hell no. The fear was still there, but underneath it, a different emotion began to grow, pure, burning anger. How dare these things come to his world and try to make him afraid? How dare they threaten his family, his friends, his home? The terror that was supposed to paralyze him instead became fuel for rage he didn't know he possessed. Dae-Hyun grabbed his radio and started coordinating defense positions. His voice was steady, even though his hands were still shaking. From the psychic attack, other officers looked at him in amazement. They had felt the fear too, but seeing their lieutenant stand firm gave them strength to fight back against the mental assault. The same thing was happening all over Earth. In Tokyo, Captain Hae-jin, Kim felt the alien terror try to crush her spirit, but instead of breaking, she found herself thinking about her daughter's smile, her husband's laugh, the cherry blossoms in spring. The fear tried to tell her that all of this would be destroyed, but that just made her more determined to protect it. She started directing missile batteries toward the alien ships, her targeting calculations sharp, despite the psychic pressure hammering at her mind. Her first salvo of conventional missiles struck a Kethmori scout ship, and something amazing happened. The organic armor that was supposed to be nearly indestructible cracked and split open. Green fluid that might have been alien blood sprayed into the atmosphere. The ship twisted in apparent pain before crashing into Tokyo Bay. "Did you see that?" Hyejin shouted over the communications channel. "These things can be hurt. Keep firing." In New York, Major Min-ho Lee was leading evacuation efforts when the fear projection hit. Like everyone else, he felt the crushing weight of telepathic terror. But Min-ho had grown up in a rough neighborhood where showing fear could get you killed. His response to being threatened had always been to fight back harder. When the alien fear tried to make him run, his street instincts kicked in instead. He redirected his evacuation convoy toward a National Guard armory, breaking open weapons, caches that were supposed to be used only in extreme emergencies. If this wasn't an extreme emergency, nothing was. His improvised explosive devices, made from construction materials and military charges, tore through alien bioarmor like it was wet paper. What the Kethmori didn't understand about humans was something that would have been impossible for them to predict. For most species in the galaxy, fear was simply fear, a signal to run, hide, or surrender. But humans were different. Human fear often came with a companion emotion that the Kethmori had never encountered before: spite. When humans get scared, sometimes they don't run. Sometimes they get mad. Really, really mad. Mad enough to charge toward the thing that's trying. To frighten them, just to prove it can't break them. This reaction made no logical sense from a survival standpoint, but it was deeply embedded in human psychology after millions of years of evolution. Across the planet, the pattern repeated itself. The Kethmori fear projection that should have ended all resistance instead triggered something the aliens had no name for. Humans who should have been cowering in terror were instead organizing, fighting back, and discovering that their enemies weren't nearly as invincible as they pretended to be. In military bases, bunkers, and emergency shelters around the world, humans were learning their first important lesson about the Kethmori. These cosmic predators were used to hunting prey that became helpless when afraid. They had never encountered prey that became dangerous when threatened. Commander Vextar stared at his tactical displays in confusion. The fear projection should have ended organized resistance within the first hour. Instead, his scouts were reporting coordinated counterattacks, effective weapons fire, and something that had never appeared in any previous conquest report: human laughter during combat. The Kethmori had made their first and biggest mistake. They had tried to make humanity afraid. But they were about to learn that scared humans weren't helpless humans. They were something much, much worse. 3 months had passed since the Kethmori invasion began, and Commander Vextar was experiencing something completely foreign to his species: doubt. What should have been a simple harvest operation had turned into a grinding war of attrition. Every day brought new reports of losses that made no sense according to everything the Kethmori understood about hunting prey. His bioships, which had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, were being picked off one by one. Not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by creatures that seemed to learn from every encounter. The humans weren't just fighting back anymore, they were hunting his hunters. The breakthrough that changed everything happened in a small coastal city called Busan. Dr. So Young Choi had been working around the clock in an underground laboratory, studying captured Kethmori technology and biology. She wasn't a soldier, she was a neuroscientist who had been researching brain-computer interfaces before the invasion. But like many humans, the war had forced her to become something she never expected. The key discovery came when Dr. Choi realized that Kethmori telepathy worked like a radio network. All the aliens were connected to each other through shared thoughts and emotions. This hive mind was what made them such effective hunters. They could coordinate perfectly, share information instantly, and never truly fight alone. But Dr. Choi saw something the aliens had never considered. If you could access their network, you could turn it against them. Working with salvaged alien biotechnology and human neural interface equipment, her team created something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They built devices that could tap into the Kethmori telepathic network and broadcast human thoughts directly into alien minds. The first test was almost accidental. A volunteer technician named Jong-Soo accidentally connected to a nearby Kethmori patrol while calibrating the equipment. What happened next was something the aliens had never experienced in their 3,000 years of conquest. Human emotions flooded into their shared consciousness, not fear or despair, but determination, anger, and something even more disturbing to the Kethmori: hope. The alien patrol began experiencing human memories of friendship, love, sacrifice, and stubborn refusal to give up. Within minutes, the entire patrol was writhing in confusion, unable to distinguish between their own thoughts and the foreign emotions pouring into their minds. Dr. Choi realized they had found the ultimate weapon. The Kethmori's greatest strength, their telepathic unity, could be turned into their greatest weakness. She began mass-producing neural interface devices and training human soldiers to use them. Soon, Keth Mori hunting parties found themselves under constant psychic assault from their intended prey. But the humans weren't just fighting with technology. They were learning to think like their enemies, and that was perhaps even more dangerous. In London, what remained of the city after the initial attacks had become a maze of rubble and twisted metal. Most people had evacuated, but Staff Sergeant Jae Wook Han had stayed behind with a small team of volunteers. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Some were police officers, others were construction workers, teachers, or shop owners. What they all shared was a stubborn refusal to let the aliens have their city. Jae Wook had noticed something about Keth Mori hunting behavior during the first weeks of occupation. The aliens were creatures of instinct, following patterns that had worked for thousands of years. They expected prey to run in predictable directions, to hide in obvious places, to act out of panic rather than planning. These instincts had served them well against every other species in the galaxy, but they became predictable weaknesses when facing humans who were paying attention. The Keth Mori would sweep through areas in standard formations, checking the same types of hiding spots, following the same patrol routes. They were like sharks following blood trails, efficient but unable to adapt when their prey started thinking several steps ahead. Jae Wook's team began setting traps that exploited these patterns. They would leave false signs of human presence in abandoned buildings, drawing alien patrols into carefully prepared kill zones. They used the city's sewer system to move unseen, popping up behind alien forces that were focused on tracking movement above ground. Most importantly, they started working together in ways that confused and frustrated their hunters. The Keth Mori were used to hunting alone or in small groups, each individual focused on their own target. But humans naturally formed larger cooperative units, sharing information and resources in real time. When a Keth Mori hunter stalked what it thought was a single human, it might find itself surrounded by a dozen fighters who had been coordinating their movements through hidden communication networks. One particularly successful ambush involved Jae Wook's team using the London Underground tunnels to their advantage. They had observed that Keth Mori scouts always entered subway systems from street-level entrances, following the tunnels in straight lines while looking for hiding humans. So the team positioned themselves at multiple points along a tunnel network, creating a web of crossfire that turned the aliens' strength against them. When a Keth Mori hunting party entered the tunnels expecting to corner terrified civilians, they instead found themselves in a coordinated killing field. Human fighters attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, using weapons ranging from military explosives to improvised devices made from construction materials. The aliens, trained to hunt individual prey, couldn't adapt quickly enough to handle organized group tactics. The most disturbing part for the Keth Mori was that humans seemed to be getting better at this kind of warfare with every engagement. They were studying alien tactics, learning from their mistakes, and sharing knowledge across their entire species through global communication networks. Each successful ambush taught lessons that were immediately transmitted to human fighters. Around the world, Commander Vextar received reports that should have been impossible. His hunters were being out-hunted by their own prey. Human teams were tracking Keth Mori movements, predicting their behavior, and setting traps that exploited every weakness in alien psychology and tactics. They're learning, Vextar transmitted to his subcommanders during an emergency strategy meeting. The words tasted bitter in his mind. In 3,000 years of conquest, he had never used the word learning to describe prey behavior. Prey ran, hid, died, or surrendered. Prey didn't study their predators and develop countermeasures, but these humans were doing exactly that, and they were doing it faster than the Keth Mori could adapt their own strategies. Every day brought new reports of successful human attacks, captured alien technology, and most frighteningly, evidence that the humans were starting to think like hunters themselves. The prey had become predators, and the galaxy's ultimate hunters were discovering what it felt like to be hunted. 8 months into the war, something incredible was happening to humanity. They weren't just surviving the Keth Mori invasion anymore, they were transforming into something entirely new. Every battle, every loss, every small victory was teaching them lessons that no other species in galactic history had ever learned. Humans were evolving in real time, not through biology, but through pure determination and intelligence. The change was visible everywhere you looked. Cities that had been reduced to rubble were now fortified bases bristling with weapons that mixed human engineering with captured alien technology. Soldiers who had started the war with basic rifles were now operating equipment that most galactic civilizations couldn't even understand. Scientists who had never seen alien technology before were now rebuilding it, improving it, and turning it against its creators. The most dramatic example of this evolution was happening in a secret facility hidden beneath the ruins of what used to be Incheon. Colonel Eugene Bay stood in the pilot chamber of something that should have been impossible. A fully functional Kethmori bioship under complete human control. The organic vessel pulsed around her like a living thing, because that's exactly what it was. But now it served human purposes instead of alien ones. Getting to this point had been a nightmare of trial and error. The first captured bioship had killed 3 research teams before they figured out how to safely interface with its living systems. The ships weren't just vehicles, they were essentially giant alien creatures that had been bred and modified to serve as weapons of war. They had their own nervous systems, their own primitive consciousness, and their own violent instincts. But humans had something the Kethmori never expected: patience and stubborn curiosity. Where other species might have given up after the first few fatal accidents, human researchers kept trying different approaches. They studied the bioships like veterinarians, studying sick animals, learning how to calm them, how to communicate with them, and eventually how to convince them to accept new masters. Dr. Kyung-ho Nam had been the breakthrough scientist who figured out how to reprogram the living computers that controlled bioship functions. These weren't machines made of metal and silicon. They were organic brains that had been grown specifically to handle navigation, weapons control, and communication systems. Reprogramming them required a combination of biochemistry, psychology, and something that felt almost like veterinary medicine. The process was incredibly dangerous. The biocomputers would sometimes fight back against human modifications, sending toxic chemicals through the ship's bloodstream or triggering defensive systems that could kill everyone aboard. But Nam and his team persisted, learning to think like the alien organisms they were trying to control. The first successful test flight had been terrifying for everyone involved. Colonel Eugene Bai had volunteered to pilot the converted ship, knowing that if something went wrong, she would likely die in one of several horrible ways. The bioship might reject her commands and crash. Its immune system might decide she was a virus and try to eliminate her. Or the psychological stress of linking with an alien consciousness might drive her insane. Instead, something amazing happened. As Eugene connected with the ship's neural interface, she felt the creature's thoughts mixing with her own. The bioship was confused and frightened, torn away from everything it had known and forced to serve new masters. But Eugene found she could communicate with it, not through words but through emotions and intentions. She showed it images of Earth, of human families, of the destruction the Kethmori had caused. Gradually, the ship began to understand that its new purpose was protection rather than conquest. Flying the bioship felt like nothing any human had ever experienced. Instead of pushing buttons and pulling levers, Eugene guided the vessel through shared thought and emotion. The ship responded to her intentions almost before she formed them, banking and diving through space with organic grace that no mechanical vehicle could match. It was like riding a dragon that had learned to trust her. But individual captured ships were just the beginning. Commander Seira-O was coordinating something much more ambitious from a hidden orbital station that had been constructed from salvaged Kethmori materials. She was building humanity's first space-based fleet, composed entirely of converted bioships and hybrid vessels that combined human engineering with alien biotechnology. The psychological impact on the Kethmori was devastating. For 3,000 years they had been the galaxy's apex predators, using their bioships to terrorize and consume other civilizations. Now they were watching their own weapons being turned against them by creatures they had considered primitive prey. Kethmori patrols reported seeing human-controlled bioships hunting alien supply convoys, with tactics that were disturbingly familiar, yet impossibly improved. Sayra's fleet didn't just copy Kethmori hunting methods, they perfected them. Human pilots brought creativity and unpredictability that the aliens couldn't match. Where Kethmori hunters followed instinctual patterns, human crews would try completely unexpected approaches, attacking from directions that made no tactical sense according to traditional predator behavior. The converted bioships themselves seemed to be changing under human influence. Ships that had once been single-minded weapons of destruction were developing new capabilities. Some learned to mimic the energy signatures of asteroids or space debris, making them nearly invisible to Kethmori sensors. Others developed enhanced healing abilities that let them recover from battle damage in hours rather than weeks. Most disturbing of all from the Kethmori perspective was that the humans were getting better at being predators than the aliens themselves. Kethmori hunting tactics had remained essentially unchanged for millennia because they worked consistently against prey species that followed predictable patterns. But humans analyzed these tactics, identified their weaknesses, and developed countermeasures that turned every Kethmori strength into a vulnerability. Commander Vextar found himself reading battle reports that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of predator and prey. His forces weren't just losing battles, they were being out-hunted by creatures that had learned to think like hunters in less than a year. Human crews were demonstrating patience, cunning, and coordination that surpassed anything in Kethmori. Military history. The most horrifying realization was that humans seemed to enjoy the challenge. Where other species had been broken by the stress of fighting the Kethmori, humans appeared to thrive on it. They were laughing during combat, celebrating victories, and turning warfare into a form of competitive sport. They treated each successful hunt of Kethmori forces like a game they were getting better at playing. 8 months ago, the Kethmori had arrived at Earth expecting to harvest another primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something that was rapidly becoming more dangerous than they were. Humanity hadn't just survived first contact with galactic predators, they had learned to become apex predators themselves. The hunters had become the hunted, and their prey was enjoying the role reversal far too much. The final battle began on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the Kethmori first darkened Earth's skies. But this time, it wasn't aliens descending on humanity, it was humans ascending to meet their former predators in the depths of space. Admiral Taemin Shin stood on the bridge of what had once been a Kethmori dreadnought, now serving as the flagship of humanity's first interstellar fleet. The ship around him pulsed with organic life, its biomechanical systems responding to human thoughts and commands as naturally as breathing. The walls were covered in a mixture of alien tissue and human technology, creating something that was neither fully organic nor mechanical, but somehow both. Screens made of living membrane displayed tactical information, while neural interfaces allowed human crew members to communicate directly with the ship's consciousness. Taemin had been a naval officer before the invasion, commanding destroyers in Earth's oceans. Now he was leading a fleet of living starships toward the largest bio-vessel ever created, the Kethmori mothership that served as both command center and nursery for their entire invasion force. The mothership was massive beyond comprehension, large enough to hold entire cities within its organic chambers. It had been the mobile capital of the Kethmori Empire for over 1,000 years, and no enemy had ever successfully attacked it. But then again, the Kethmori had never faced humans before. The human fleet that approached the mothership would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. Dozens of converted bioships moved in perfect coordination, their living hulls adapted with human modifications that made them faster, stronger, and more flexible than their original designs. Human engineers had learned to think like alien biotechnicians, growing new weapons systems and defensive capabilities that the Kethmori couldn't counter. Leading the boarding assault was Captain Sujin Park, a former Special Forces operator, who had become something like a legend among human resistance fighters. She moved through the corridors of her assault ship with the confident stride of someone who had learned to feel at home in enemy territory. Her team was a mixture of soldiers, scientists, and engineers, all of them volunteers who understood they might not survive the next few hours. The attack began with a coordinated strike that demonstrated just how much humanity had learned about warfare in space. Instead of charging directly at the mothership like traditional prey species might have done in desperation, the human fleet used tactics that the Kethmori had never encountered. Some ships approached from unexpected angles, using the gravitational fields of nearby planets to mask their approach. Others disguised themselves as space debris, drifting closer while appearing to be harmless wreckage. The most brilliant part of the assault was psychological. Human-controlled bioships began broadcasting modified versions of Kethmori hunting calls, the telepathic signals that alien hunters used to coordinate with each other. But the human versions carried emotional content that confused and disoriented the defending aliens. Instead of conveying confidence and predatory focus, these signals carried human emotions like determination, hope, and something the Kethmori had no name for, the satisfaction of protecting one's home. Commander Vextar watched the approaching human fleet from the mothership's command center, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something that his species rarely experienced: genuine fear. Not the tactical concern that came from facing a difficult opponent, but the deep, primal terror of realizing that you were about to become prey yourself. The human ships moved with a coordination and creativity that defied everything the Kethmori understood about space combat. They used their bioship's organic capabilities in ways that the original designers had never imagined, treating the living vessels as partners rather than tools. Some ships split apart into smaller units that could slip through the mothership's defenses, then reassemble once inside. Others grew new weapon systems in real time, adapting to each new challenge as it appeared. When the boarding began, Sujin Park and her teams moved through the mothership's organic corridors like they owned them. The Kethmori had designed their ship to be psychologically intimidating to intruders. The walls pulsed like heartbeats, strange fluids dripped from ceiling membranes, and the air itself seemed to whisper with alien thoughts. These features had terrified every previous enemy who had attempted to board Kethmori vessels, but the humans seemed completely unbothered by the alien environment. If anything, they appeared to be enjoying themselves. Park's team moved with military precision through chambers that looked like the inside of some massive creature, setting charges and securing key systems with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. The final confrontation came when Park's team reached the mothership's central nervous system, a vast chamber filled with organic computers that controlled every aspect of the vessel's functions. Commander Vextar was waiting for them, his massive form blocking the entrance to the most critical systems. He expected a desperate final battle, the kind of last stand that prey species usually attempted when cornered. Instead, Park looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You never learned the most important thing about humans," she said calmly, her words translated through the neural interface systems that connected all the ship's occupants. "We don't stay afraid. We get angry and then we get even." The battle that followed was brief and decisive. Vextar had spent his entire life hunting creatures that became helpless when frightened. He had never learned to fight opponents who became more dangerous when threatened. Park and her team moved like they were dancing, coordinating their attacks through shared thoughts and emotions in ways that the Kethmori hive mind couldn't match. As human forces took control of the mothership's vital systems, Vextar realized that his species' reign as galactic apex predators was over. The creatures they had come to harvest had instead harvested them, learning everything the Kethmori knew about hunting and improving upon it. The last transmission from the Kethmori fleet went out to every corner of the galaxy, a warning that would echo through space for generations to come. "Avoid the third world from the yellow star," the message said. "The prey has become the predator. The humans have evolved beyond fear." As the surviving alien ships limped away toward the galactic rim, carrying news of their defeat to whatever remained of their empire, Earth stood transformed. Humanity had learned the most valuable lesson in the universe, that being hunted was just another form of education, and they had been very good students. The galaxy's apex predators were extinct. In their place stood something entirely new, a species that had discovered their true nature, not in spite of being threatened, but because of it. The humans had learned that sometimes the thing that tries to make you afraid ends up teaching you exactly how dangerous you really are. And across the galaxy, other predator species began to have nightmares about a small blue world whose inhabitants refused to stay prey.